So earlier today, we had a talk with Bram Weerts on his views about sales enablement. Bram, one of the things you always say is that analyst relations is under pressure, and that sales enablement takes some of that pressure off. Can you elaborate on your views a little bit?
Analyst relations is always under pressure. It comes primarily because analyst relations is spending money, and it's not always very clear on what the results are. Measurement is very important, so eventually the person or persons who give you the budget will get that feedback, but it's only that part of the company that receives that information. What is much more interesting is that you can go towards your sales department, the money-making machine of your company, and explain to them how they can reduce time towards sell, and really, give them a bit of your chunk of how much money is invested in your core business towards sales, and leverage that much more, so you have much more to gain in the end. Explaining towards sales, listen, this is what we're doing, feeding that information back towards the person who lent you the budget, or towards the company in total, where you can really show as an analyst relations professional that you're not only supporting a part of the company, but you can support the complete company with what you're doing.
And I know a lot of analyst relations people, and especially I think that the managers of analyst relations people are often very scared to reach out to salespeople. Can you explain, why should we be reaching out to sales, and maybe after then we can talk about some of the challenges that people might experience in doing that.
Yeah, I think it's quite common within any company that departments have issues with communicating, especially towards one another. It's very strange if you wear all the same colors, but nobody is really talking to one another. Analyst relations is no difference in this play. Salespeople not often go to analyst relations people; they go to marketing departments, but I honestly do not know how many salespeople would be aware of the fact that a analyst relations profession and professional exist, and what the benefit would be for them to talk to them. I think it will all come down towards AR people reaching out to sales with some proper documentation, with explaining why this is so beneficial for them, because it shows they're different than their competitor, or they're smarter than a competitor, or they're very close towards the big players. So you should also consider us. It is not us saying this, but it's an independent third party who is well recognized within the industry, explaining what it is that we do. So there are many benefits about talking to one another. The reason it doesn't happen is it's just, it's for me it's hard to understand, but maybe it's lack of understanding that these organizations exist within your company.
So you've spoken about some of the first challenges with supporting sales. I mean, there are also some interesting risks there. That maybe people might not have initially a very positive reaction when they reach out to sales. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it completely depends to which people in sales you would talk to. I would start at the management level and leave the people that actually dial out or make the contact towards clients. Well, you come back with them with a proven concept. You're not going to hassle them with if you would do this, it would benefit you. I would make sure it's happening on the management level, that you have your buy-in, that they understand how they can support their sales force with the minimum investment, maximum results. Make it very clear on how quickly you can train your sales force, and training is actually a very tough word, because it's basically explaining it's not even training, it's explaining in a 10-15 minute briefing in the morning why this is so important and why you can use this in your sales calls. So are there any challenging with supporting sales? I honestly don't think so. Is there any issue with talking to sales? It completely depends on which level you start.
There's one final question I wanted to put to you was about definitions of sales enablement, because I definitely see some people are talking about sales enablement as driving revenue growth. And other people think that it's about making sales reps experts on analysts, or making sales reps experts on analyst relations. What kind of definition do you think we should be starting off with when we think about sales enablement?
My definition of sales enablement is making sure you enable your sales with all the intelligence that is coming from an analyst relations department. A marketing department can do sales enablement, a product department can do sales enablement, a technical department can do sales enablement. It's nothing more than filling the gaps that a sales rep can benefit from in a sales call, in a sales pitch, in an RFI, RFP. It's stuff that sets you apart from your competition, makes you valuable, and so it's definitely not making your sales department specializing in analyst relations, specializing in which analyst to quote and that kind of stuff. That's all very nice information, but not really something you will benefit from immediately. It's cool to drop a line maybe to say this analyst recently said that we have done this, but this should be the enabling of the sales from the analyst relations department. And a sales rep shouldn't have to do anything else than use that information in the right process on the right time, and they can, because it's their profession. They know exactly when to name these kind of favors when in a sales call. So enabling sales enablement is analyst relations professionals helping salespeople with that bit of information that can set them apart and can actually close the deal or give them information on how to make it happen in the future with that prospect.
That's fantastic. Bram, I think that's everything that I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much. Is there anything else on your mind? Is there anything that I didn't ask you about sales enablement that you think we need to say before we move on?
No, at this stage, I think my last comment is actually why we should have these talks. It's all about informing people. It's making that link possible that is already existing but people are not using. It's that highway that nobody takes. It's a shame. It is not something that you can just drive your car up on and take that road. You maybe need to pay some toll to get access to that road, and in that sense, I mean, a bit of training, a bit of explaining. It takes maybe a bit of time, but after it's a good session with the right people, I think sales enablement is something that every company that has an analyst relations team will benefit from. It's either now or in the very near future. Thanks for having me, Duncan, and just let me know if I can contribute on anything else.
Great, thanks very much. Let's take the conversation forward. Dave Eckert, thank you so much for joining us today. Dave, obviously you're one of the most experienced people in the analyst relations community, but that leadership is even stronger when it comes to issues of sales enablement. So in your time at Hewlett-Packard, before then, and obviously more recently at Sage Circle, you've been coaching some of the world's largest organizations and many startups on how to look at questions around sales enablement. Now, obviously, Bram has got his own perspective, having been in sales and having worked for Gartner. Now, you've been on the other side of the fence. I'm sure things aren't going to work the same for you. I'm sure you're not going to see things exactly the same way that he does. But I wonder, just to start off on the level of definition, can I maybe start off with that? How do you see the whole question of partnership between analyst relations and sales, Dave?
Sure. One of the biggest things about partnership with analyst relations and sales is trying to put together something that works for both of them. This is really critical because in the past, many times, these are two completely separate organizations that really don't converse well. So when we talk about a definition of an AR sales partnership, we're talking about a formal program that provides some very basic understanding to the sales force. And the word basic is really critical here. And I'll explain more about that as we get into this. And it provides the sales team some very easy to use tools. And those tools are to either leverage the positive aspects of the analyst community, or to mitigate those places where we perhaps have some negative influence. The whole goal of this is obviously to drive revenue growth. And it's very important to understand that there is not a goal of making sales reps in any way expert on the analysts themselves or on AR. That's a different job. So what we're looking to do here is to provide some very basic tools and basic understanding off to the sales force. Let's take a look at some of the things that we could do with that in the next slide. A couple of key concepts that I'd like to kind of point out here, and that is that there's a big advantage to the AR team, because if you have a partnership, you're going to elevate the role of AR. AR is going to actually have a much more critical position within the company. And that's, of course, is always valuable when you're looking at resources and funding and things of that nature. But it also provides a vendor, and I'm referring to you as the AR team and your sales team, a competitive edge in the deals, because you've got a new ally who can help you, and that new ally might be the positive analysts. So there's a really important benefit there, and we'll talk more about benefits and risks as we get further in. But one of the other things that's really important is to understand that that comes with the risk, and that risk is that AR has to have the ability to do this, and we're going to take a look at how we would go about actually creating the system. Part of that is we have to do some reallocation. We have to find resources. I begin this process sometimes with the team, and I'll say, well, here's what we're going to do, and their first response is, well, I'm already working more hours than there are in the week. How do you expect me to actually put a whole new program into place? And the answer has to be, there's something that has to go. So we're going to have to do some trimming somewhere and reduce those things that are not actually providing you benefit. We'll take a look at some of those. And then we need to build an understanding between the sales management and your AR executive sponsorship. If you don't have sponsorship at both ends here, then this is going to be fighting upstream the whole way. Finding a sponsor within the sales organization is a key part of that success. So that's going to be a really, really key item. I did get a question that came in that says, does it matter in which stage of your analyst relations program you start building the relationship with sales? And I would say the answer to that is no. It doesn't make any difference what stage you're in, but you do need to be in a stage. You need to at least have your basic operations put together. That means that you need to be well organized. You need to have a valid budget. You need to have at least a reasonable staff. You also need to have some good record keeping. You need to understand who your analysts are. So the basics have to be there. But once you've crossed that basics, then it's quite possible that your stage is far enough along that you can actually begin to create one of these programs. And I have another question here that says, how exactly can analysts help actually influence specific deals? And what do I do to make this happen? Well, I think we understand mostly how analysts can impact a deal negatively, but how they can impact a deal positively is maybe a little less obvious. So there are places that you can use the analysts to provide influence. One of them, of course, is if there is positive research, you can highlight that with the customer. An example might be a positive magic quadrant, or perhaps maybe you've got another piece of information, some kind of analyst commentary that highlights you as having a particularly strong area. One other area is to look at client inquiry. That is, can you get your positive analyst to discuss something with that client? Those are kind of stock things that you should be doing as an AR team anyway, and it really doesn't directly influence sales. However, I would say these are the things that you couple with a sales enablement program in order to kind of make it more valuable. So let's move ahead to the next slide, Duncan. So what's the focus of this AR sales partnership? What are the goals? The goals are to raise the team awareness. What we want here is for the sales team to be aware of the potential influence that the analysts have. Sometimes the sales team is not fully engaged. They don't understand that there's an analyst that has either a positive or a negative outlook. And then we want to equip the sales team with some basic information. We need to make these tools, this information, available to them when they need it. So it's got to be an online kind of a situation. If you send them emails, they will get dumped and then never read. So it's got to be placed somewhere within the sales team's portal. So this is not something you're going to build, but something that you're going to add to something that they're already doing. And you also need to do some kind of a customer service hotline for the sales team so that they can call you when they run into a problem. And now this is going to be a resource issue, and we're going to talk more about that as we go. The process here has to be that you're going to work within the context of how sales works. You cannot get sales to work the way you work because they're a much larger organization. They've already got an infrastructure. They've already got processes in place. So it's really, really important for you to work within their framework. I have another question here that says, how do I know if and how analysts are impacting sales? Well, that's part of what we want to do here. We want to raise the team awareness so that they're looking for that influence and that they can provide that contact information back to you. I'm going to come back to that a little bit more later on, because understanding what the influence of the analysts is really, really important for analyst relations. Let's go ahead and move on. Duncan, let's take a look at the next slide here. So what can analyst relations provide to sales? We're going to look at this both directions. Well, you can provide training program information, sales tools, and client service. I mentioned each of these, but let's do them in greater detail. A training program might be live training in a classroom, by webinar, by phone. It may also be recorded and posted onto a portal. Now, let me put a major caveat right here. You will never get salespeople to come to your training program. The only way you're going to train them is for you to insert a small piece of training into their program. So if they've got a training program for new sales hires, that's a place you'd like to insert some training. But more importantly, the sales team has regular meetings. They have staff meetings. They have perhaps boondoggle meetings where they go spend 3 days together at some hotel in the south of France. There are places where all of the sales team is together, and if you can get your training very short, very focused, inserted into that training, then you'll have success. Don't try to create something that you want them to come to you to attend. The second thing is information. So you need to have a lot of ways of providing information. And as I said, that needs to be placed on the sales portal. So you may have something where there's a regular message that comes out of the sales portal or out of the sales community that you can add an alert to talk a little bit about something that is significant. That's where you will get their attention. Tools. How to go about exploiting positive or overcoming negative commentary, and checklists for working with prospects. These can be added to the sales portal. These can also be inserted into newsletters. But again, this is the sales newsletter. Now that last one, which was the client service, is when there comes some crisis and an analyst has done something and that salesperson needs help, you need to be able to provide a timely, some kind of timely response with both information and also advice. So that does require an AR resource, at that point, and that's a key item as we go. Let's move ahead. A couple things that we really want to avoid. We cannot demand time from sales. I say significant amount of time. It's almost any time. The salespeople have a goal. It's their direction. So effort, time, and so forth, you're just not going to get it. And you're not going to be able to change the way they work. So don't even attempt that. You are not making salespeople into expert on analysts. A key that I think is important on the AR side is to take this in little tiny steps. You need to kind of be really aggressive about how you approach this. And by aggressive, I mean you need to focus on what you can drop to make time. And you need to take little baby steps, a phased approach as you begin to move in. The process of cutting out AR services that you've done in the past is very painful. but you're going to have to do some of that as you begin to insert various activities that you're working with sales. So you need to take this very gently. You need to be certain that you have done the right services and the right tools that meet sales expectations. And the best way to do that is going to be a pilot program or a phased approach. You need to work through a small section of sales, be certain that they are happy and that you're kind of working through, and be certain that you're not yourself overloaded. If you suddenly get a huge number of requests from sales and you can't fulfill, then the whole program is going to go down the drain. So it's really, really important to take this in small steps and kind of work your way in. Those are the things that we need to avoid. Let's move on to the next one here. How do you find those resources? Like I just said to you, you're going to have to cut some things out in order to make time. So what do you do? Well, my suggestion here is you need to look really carefully at your workload and your budget so that you can do a reallocation. We call this a zero-based review. That is, take a look at all the things that you're currently doing. Actually, one of the most interesting things that I have done with some clients is to say, write a log, write a little diary of what you do every day for maybe as much as a month. Just a note, it doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but where are you spending your time? And likewise, when you're working with the your budget, take a look at where you're spending your actual dollars. Now, once you've got that kind of little cheat sheet of activities, go down that and take a look and say, what of those can I really drop? Which ones are not productive? One example of that is taking a careful look at your analyst lists. Okay, you've got a list of what you're calling your Tier 1 analysts. Now, often people will say to me, oh, I have 100 Tier 1 analysts, and the answer is no, you don't. You need to identify who the most significant analysts are and work with them, and move other people down to Tier 2 or even Tier 3. And what that means is if you've created yourself some kind of a service level agreement, internal service level agreement that says this is the service level I provide for my key Tier 1 analysts, and this is what I provide for Tier 2, and this is what I provide for Tier 3. You may find yourself doing a lot of work for people who don't make a lot of difference. Those Tier 3 analysts that are not influencing your sales do not demand and get lots of extra time. So if you have the ability to go through and carefully do that, you should find that you should be able to cut a number of hours out of your time budget and be able to also, therefore, cut out some of your dollar budget. So that's where you find your resources. And by the way, even if you're not going to go to Sales Enablement, do that anyway. Now, on the next slide here, we want to do some sponsorship kinds of things. So my suggestion here is the first thing we need to do is to find somebody in sales who can really help us out. What we're looking for is someone who can educate you on how the sales team works. You can plant some seeds that talk about how you could potentially help the team with various kinds of AR resources. So this is a key function here. Now, this sponsorship is typically going to be at the upper level. This is going to be a sales manager, maybe a division manager, something like that. We've got to try to find somebody in there, and we want to provide at least some basic information so that they look at this and say, yeah, okay, if you started to work with us, we see the value. We're not going to object to what you're doing, and so forth. Interesting question here. How do I know who to approach in the sales organization to start this relationship? Here's a place to start, and that is there somebody who has come to you, some salesperson who has come to you on a regular basis that you've previously worked with? They don't have to be a manager. As a matter of fact, they're probably not a manager. They're probably some salesperson in the trenches. But you've got somebody who's perhaps come to you now. Ask them how to go about finding the best sponsor. Maybe it's his manager, because he can come in and say, you know, I've got some really good relationships with Analyst Relations, and they're going to try something. Can I have you talk to them a little bit about it? So this is a place you want to kind of insert yourself very carefully into the system, and sort of see what what can I find in terms of getting a sponsor. Now we're going to take a look at another approach there, and that is on the next slide. Let's call it a coach. Now that coach might be that same person that you've been talking about, but not necessarily. What do we need in a coach? A coach has to be somebody who can tell us about impacts that the analysts have had on deals. We call those the war stories. Positive, more likely negative. It's interesting how you're very rarely going to get somebody coming in saying, oh, that analyst was so helpful. Most frequently it's that analyst has just caused all my problems. So you're going to have to watch and try to get a balance. That coach also can provide you an insight into how sales works, how the organization is set up, what is the culture, and where you are likely to get success and where you're likely to run into barriers. So that coach can provide you guidance. Who's the upper level management who will be able to support them? And how would you go about going to that manager, that executive, to get that level of support? So that coach might be a sales rep who you've been working with. Maybe it's somebody in the same building. That's always very helpful if you've got somebody where you can have face-to-face contact. Maybe it's a major account director, because obviously the major accounts are more frequently influenced by the analyst than the one-offs. So find that coach that you've got out there. Now, we want to focus on the value, and the focus on the value has to be, what is it that's in it for sales? And the key thing is ultimately sales. That is, that's what they care about. They're more interested. They don't care about analysts. They care about sales. So what you want to do is to really focus on the things that can make them sales. You want to highlight the positives where they can close business more rapidly. Now that's a key one. Not just simply close the business, but close the business more rapidly. So if you can find those kinds of things and highlight and push those, that's going to give you a lot of credibility. Likewise, where you have negative influence, providing them with content that will counterbalance that is a really key thing. So ultimately what sales is looking for is big commissions without doing a lot of work. And if there's anything you can do to help them in that kind of situation, then that's going to be something that really improves this whole potential of working. I have a question that says, how can you convince sales of the value of an effective relationship? It's here in the money. That's the only thing that's going to convince them. So convincing them that you can do something that provides them bigger commissions with less work is probably the answer for the way you want to approach it. So, okay, I've given you a bunch of guidance in terms of things we might want to do, but now how will you actually make this happen? Well, the approach that we suggest is, first of all, you need to create a plan. This plan should be something that you're going to build first internally and then with your coach. You want to sit down and say, well, what's realistic? Now, part of that plan is, where am I going to find my resources, both within AR and within sales? How am I going to get rid of some of those things that are not productive so that I have the time available? What is my phase deployment schedule? Who am I going to go to first? What process do I go through? What is the pilot plan, and what is the rollout? The most important and, again, critical item is you have to leverage the existing sales infrastructure. That means you need to go find out about it. How do they work? What are their meetings? What are their various plans? How do they communicate? What kind of communications go out on a regular basis? What kind of portal is available to them? And is it in any way selective? That is, can I do something that would be for only one team, one division, one geography, or something to make a real pilot out of this? If you try to do something that is across the entire level, then we're going to run into a real problem. So that's kind of the direction. I've got another question here that says, what factors are critical for an effective relation? I think that the really critical factor is coming up with AR time and resource. If you don't have the time and the resource, this is never going to work. I would also say coming up with a coach is probably a critical factor. Those two items to put together the plan, I think, are key. Another question, what kinds of goals should I set? What kind of revenue or the number of deals impacted? The first goal has to be satisfaction, not necessarily revenue. It's got to be satisfaction on the part of the sales team. If the sales team is happy with how the process is working, then you will begin to get the other goals that you could set of revenue or the number of deals impacted and so forth. Now, remember, as you begin to put your plan together, you're going to want to add some metrics into this plan. You have to measure this to be certain that what you're doing is making sense. And so the metrics that you want to put into place will ultimately be how much revenue am I impacting? How many sales am I impacting, number of deals? Those kinds of metrics will come out, but not necessarily during the pilot. During the pilot, we want to determine what metrics are available and how you're going to be able to set them up. So the goal for your pilot ought to be to just get this thing working a little bit and kind of understand what needs to happen to expand it. My experience in the past has been those companies that actually get into this and begin to do this well will suddenly find a very strong support on the part of sales and ultimately have been able to increase their AR resources, because as they get out of the pilot stage and begin to move into what we might call production stage, they find that they really do need more resources, and they will wind up getting those resources because they're demonstrating value. And so demonstrating value is a really important part of this process. That's, again, another one of those critical factors. When you come up with these goals and come up with a kind of a process, that will help you establish how you're going to proceed as you move on to the next step. Duncan, do you have any additional questions that have come in?
There are no more questions that have come in now, and honestly, Dave, I'm a little bit embarrassed at how many questions people in the AR forum did throw at you, and hugely impressed that you've been able to cover them all in the time that we had. But I think we're pretty much up against the time limit for the call now. Dave, thank you so much. Your insight is always hugely impressive for us, and we are just so lucky to have you in the team that's helping us put the AR forum together and obviously guide Kia Company going forward. I'm gonna wrap up the call now. Thank you so much for joining us, and obviously to also thank Bram Weerts who joined us on the call earlier on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And if anyone has questions, please feed them on back in, and we'll try to come up with an answer for you.
Thank you so much. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.